On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Shawn Ferris. Shawn is a bit of a legend in my world. I think he basically hits all of these different elements that are so cool, working with Evolving Wild, as it used to be. Now it's Evolving Hockey, if I'm getting that correct, on the rebrand. Yeah, it's quite the thing you guys have done. So we'll dive into that. But other than your Bruins love, everything else seems to be absolutely wonderful with you. So excited for this podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to join you this evening. It'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, give us a little bit of background on you, how you got to where you are in the hockey world right now, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I guess the hockey world, where I sort of started, or where I broke in, I guess, was with Ryan Stimson's passing project. And so that occurred when I was a senior in high school, I want to say. it was like 2015 was kind of when that was starting to pop off. And so I think I was just watching a hockey game one night, and I just thought about passing, and then Ryan had this passing project. And so I emailed Ryan and I started tracking some games, and I really enjoyed that. And eventually that led me to starting to do some work for an OHL team. And then I started doing some more things publicly and got into hockey graphs. And then eventually through hockey graphs, I actually brought in like the Evolving Wild twins. They kind of came in at the same time as me. And when I was talking with Garrett Hull, who was one of the founders of Hockey Graphs, I said that the Evolving Wild twins should join us. And long story short, ended up actually at the time we didn't know they were twins. Long story short, they ended up being twins. They developed a website, and I ended up joining them probably 2019. And so that's kind of where I ended up with that. I continued with that OHL thing for my 4 years of undergrad. And now I largely just do the Evolving Hockey stuff. And I guess within that, I sometimes forget it, but in 2018, I did work for the Hamilton Bulldogs, and I have an OHL championship to my name, I guess. So that's one interesting thing about me.
Oh, so we got a champion in our midst. I like it. But going back on your start, obviously Ryan is a highly influential person in especially the beginning stages of this analytics movement. What was it like working with him and his ideas, his thought processes, how he evolved over the time that you guys worked together? Because obviously that was kind of like the first big thing that I remember seeing out there as someone trying to do like a public sourced data project.
Yeah, so Ryan was definitely a good mentor for me. And what I really enjoyed most about Ryan was that he was a very different thinker and a deep thinker. And a lot of his early writing through the project that he was running was just he had a different view on traditional hockey topics. And I found that incredibly interesting, and kind of it inspired me as well. The one that I remember the most is probably his one on low to high tactics. Ryan wasn't at the time really into sort of the coaching side of things. And the draft was in Buffalo that particular year. And so he went to the coaching conference that the NHL holds, and he saw a presentation on sort of low to high offense and behind the net offense. And then he went ahead and took the data and compared it. It did a really thorough analysis on the two. And I just found that fascinating. And Ryan ended up running away with the coaching stuff, and he wrote his own book, Tape to Space. And he just really found a niche in the coaching area. He did some different things for the coaches site. He was on the Glass and Out podcast. And so it was just really interesting to kind of be able to have Ryan as a source through his growth, starting in sort of the analytics sphere, and then sort of turning into what he kind of called like Tacticalytics, kind of combining analytics and coaching. It was just really awesome to have him as a resource.
So Tacticalytics, that's a good name. What all does that entail?
I think it's really about like taking, well, I don't think in American sports we often call them like tactics, right? It's kind of different, but it's more like a soccer type of term where you call, I don't know, sort of like the technical stuff on the ice tactics, or your strategy tactics. And then sort of combining that with like an evidence-based approach. Ryan was just always big about just having some evidence for whatever you say. And I think that's kind of just what it speaks to. We say, he had an example in his book for as an example of, he coached a, I don't remember if it was like a minor midget team. I forget what
14U.
age level. Yeah, was that it? And they took a face off, and the way that they set up, Ryan was like, "Why are we setting up like that?" And one of the assistant coaches like told him, "Well, this is how we did it back in the day when Don Cherry was in Rochester." And Ryan's just somebody who questions things, and he just needs an answer. And Ryan has a different view on face-offs, and he sort of developed it himself, but he thinks deeply about just any sort of question. I think that's really what Tacticalytics is about.
I think the key aspect, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, is just like asking the questions in the first place. Like, even if you don't know the answer or don't have the answer quite yet, now you're getting other people thinking about this. And if they're not thinking about it, well, maybe we need to find another person or a new environment to thrive in. And I do some USA hockey coach developing, and like that's my big thing. Like, you don't have to know anything about hockey. If you're just asking questions, getting the players thinking, like they become their own best coaches.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's just I think even with the analytics thing, and I think coaching is really catching up on this. Like I think coaching is getting super progressive, and there's progressive people that are kind of coming up on this. I think just as a whole, North American hockey is really sort of catching up with just like thinking about why we do things. But yeah, it's like it's just asking yourself the questions of, is this right? And it might turn out that like the way something's being done is correct, but like you just kind of want to know why. And as you search for the answer, you're one going to come up on different questions to go onto different tangents. And then two, you're just like thinking more deeply, and you're just going to understand more than you did before. So it's just a terrific practice no matter what, to be able to just understand what's going on.
Yeah, and research is boring like that. 90% of the time, if not more, it's like, oh yeah, that's leading to the result that we've always been doing, and passing is important. Like, oh no, duh. But
Yeah.
I'm curious on, for you, right? You've seen all these analytics. You've been involved in this community. What are some ways that you've seen the game, or if you have some stats off the top of your head or a cheat sheet, what are some stats that you see and are like, yeah, teams need to be playing this way, or this is an advantageous way to play based on the evidence behind these tactics?
So I think early on it was like Eric Tolsky, who now works for the Hurricanes, who I think is just very well known around the hockey world at this point. I forget what his official title is now, but like they kept changing it and sort of promoting it, and it became very clear that he was important. He was like the initial one, I could be wrong, but he was the sort of the initial one that brought zone entry importance, and I believe he did exits as well, to sort of the public sphere of analytics. He teamed up with a paper with, I want to say, and I'm going off the top of my head, Brian McDonald, Corey Schneider, and somebody else at Sloan one year too. Like this, is like 2014, and like that was a big part of like kind of combining analytics and saying like this is kind of how we need to play, because it was just obvious that being able to control entries would lead to more shot attempts and therefore more goals. And I would say that would kind of be the possession stats I think would point you towards the idea of how you want to play. But I always would warn too that there's definitely some different factors in there that would maybe change the way also that you want to think about that. And like again, like you sort of dig deeper, like I said, you draw more questions on as well. And Asma Tume or Toomey, I always mispronounce her name. She had a paper, I think it was at Nessus, that sort of looked at Bayesian. I forget. She did a lot of math to find like which teams like would be more advantageous or less advantageous to control entries against. But I think you find a lot of good sort of tactic stuff out of that type of data.
2013 was the year. I get to do research while you talk, so it's perfect. So Eric
Oh,
Tulsky
this
came out
long
of that.
paper.
Yeah, 2013 from Eric Tulsky. And I remember that because it was the summer that Parise came out saying that he read this paper and that he was going to be trying to dump less. That I remember hearing about that. So that was like a super cool thing to see. It's like, controlled entries now. It's like a no-brainer. Everyone tries to do it, especially on the power play. But if we go back and you watch a game from 2010, that was not the preferred tactic.
Oh yeah, it was. I think during COVID they started showing a lot of replays, and I remember watching a replay of the 2011 Stanley Cup final, and I just almost could not watch it. I could not believe that was like um, some of the best hockey that 2011 had to offer. Like just the change in speed and the change that or the different decisions that players make now. It's just like crazy to look at. And I would bet, and this is probably going to sit in a private sort of private area for a while, but I bet you there's something else that sort of you could look at that's a decision, a clear decision. Thing with zone entries, they're clear decisions. You have some piece of context that might determine that decision, but you sort of have the ability to choose whether or not you carry the puck across the blue line. If you're going to get checked early and you're going to give up the puck, then yes, like the best idea is like to dump in the puck. There's probably somewhere out there still that there's a clear decision point that players make that maybe we're not even on, which is like something that doesn't keep me up at night, but it keeps me curious for sure.
Well, I guarantee that point shot sucks. So I think that's one we can all
I
agree
agree
on,
with
right?
that. I agree with that.
Did you end up reading my newsletter post on point shot suck?
Yes, I think it didn't you follow up with mine as well? I feel like we had a follow up there to rebounds. Is that
No,
the
we did. Yeah, you were the last thing. You're like, oh, I got this cool graph. Like, I'm gonna add it. Graphic. Can you add it? Yeah, you're right. I did edit that up.
because it's a false kind of a false assumption, and then actually that sort of goes back to one of the Ryan articles I referenced earlier, where point shots actually produce, generally speaking, less rebounds than other shots. So it's like kind of a false assumption, and I probably accepted that assumption for like years and years, like probably until my early 20s, until like Ryan came out with that.
Well,
That like
every
point
coach in
shots.
their every coach in their right mind was spewing that for how many years? Like, oh, you get the pucks to the net and crash for rebounds. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
they, well,
And
they
then you look
still
at
sort of still do.
some teams, yeah, but now you see, those rates have come down over time. So, and now it's come to like, how do you improve recoveries? How do we take other shots? How do we open up the middle of the ice more? Like those types of things. I don't know. Are those the things that you're watching, or like when you watch a game, what are you looking for now? So obviously you come from a different background than most here on how you probably even just see the game through a different lens.
Yeah, I definitely think. Well, so even so, I think I said this. I don't know if I've said this. I said this somewhere, I think, recently, that Andrew Thomas had. Oh no, this is unreleased. Something I haven't released yet. Andrew Thomas, who worked for the Wild at one point, who was one of the co-developers of War on Ice, which was one of the original hockey analytics sites, said that in his experience with the Wild, traditionally like hockey people are really focused on like quality of shots and different things like that, and analytics people are more focused on sort of the process to that. And I would say I probably focus on the process of getting to shots more than anything, to almost like the points where like I kind of not stop paying attention, but like shots just feel different to me. And so I focus like a lot more on like I would say like forechecking and how how teams are defending in the zone. I really like defense. how teams are defending in the zone and like the differences of support, off ice, off puck things. Like I look like completely like probably away from what everybody else looks at, to the point where shots like they just don't, they like almost feel like a blip in my watching. Like they almost feel like a distraction. Like I'm very focused on more the defensive side of the game.
So you're focused more on the process of how these things come about than the actual event itself. Okay. Um, moving on a little bit, I'm curious about your time with hockey graphs, because that is one very influential website that has produced many people that have gone on to influence modern day hockey. Curious what your involvement was to start.
So I joined back in, maybe it was the February or March. It was probably March, let's say, of like 2017. I had wrote an article before that that sort of like, I guess, impressed some people, which is basically, I would like to redo it at some point and sort of do it better. But it's basically under the premise that teams that rely heavily on high quality shots will underperform their expected goals, and would be less consistent. And so I wrote this article, and Garrett had invited me in to Hockey Graphs, and I um, wrote a handful of articles while I was there. The biggest piece of Hockey Graphs is kind of what goes on behind the scenes, I guess. The Slack was really an area for me, and I think others as well, where we almost had this like little sub Twitter, I guess, if you will. We were able to just kind of interact and learn from each other. And so if people could go back and see some like the debates on expected goals and these other like I'm struggling here. These other regression models, and just sort of like the debate on them, it was like a huge like learning environment for me, more than doing any sort of, I guess, work. Because it was just really, it was a great area for like bringing a lot of great hockey minds together and just being able to share things. And yeah, I mean, you talk about the alumni, it's kind of an impressive list. I don't know where it's at now. It's probably in our Slack alone, there's probably like 10 people that ended up going on and currently work for NHL teams, and some others are just they do other impressive things, and some don't work in hockey anymore. I mean, not everybody has stuck with it, but yeah, more than anything, it was just like a great environment to just learn about analytics and what kind of goes on behind the scenes, all the thinking that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm never going to be a Michael Blake McCurdy, but to be able to sort of understand a lot of what goes into a model and learn how to draw things from it was like really crucial.
I love specifics. If you could give maybe like an example or something that really blew you away, or something that, maybe not dive into the weeds on the super technicals, but some things that maybe you pulled away and learned that players, parents, coaches that are listening could learn from.
Ooh. Again, I'm thinking, because a lot of what was learned in that was really more of the technicals of the model, and sort of what goes into it. I remember though specifically we had a conversation about like high school junior type of stats. So this is actually an interesting one where someone, I remember this. Okay, so someone had asked, I believe it was Micah, who's in our Slack. He was never like officially a part of Hockey Graphs, I don't think, but like he was part of our Slack. So someone had asked them about, this person wanted to help out for like a high school team, I want to say, or maybe it was a junior team. Micah had this idea that you probably shouldn't use relative statistics. And I don't remember how he came to that conclusion. Maybe it's worth reevaluating. But it's just sort of better off if you're trying to keep stats for a high school program or a local college program or what have you, and you want to include stats, it would probably just be, you're probably fine to just do your normal on ice stuff and not try to go too complicated. You're going to get the same message, if not a better message, than if you try to like do some sort of relative statistics. Just because it's either you should do a full regression or just leave it sort of raw as a short kind of lesson to be learned.
So don't do too much, because
don't do too much unless you have the ability to do too much, because then you're going to waste your time.
Yeah, because you're probably going to get a similar message, and is the extra clarity that important, as long as it maybe puts you in the right direction to start with? That's the way I would take that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Excellent. Is there any favorite pieces or things that stick out in your mind from your time at Hockey Graphs? Like, oh, that was an awesome piece. That was great research, or like that changed the way I see the game or people play the game?
So again, I would always love to point back to Ryan and a few of his articles there. Particularly the biggest piece that had the most influence on me, and it was while I was at Hockey Graphs and it was on Hockey Graphs, was Ryan Stimson's piece on basically sort of tactics in the offensive zone. So to kind of dig deeper, because I was part of the passing project, right? We the way we record it, we would record the previous 3 shots to a shot attempt. We'd call them shot assists, and we'd do it all in Excel, but we'd kind of keep we would record the zones. And so it'd be like offensive zone, right lane, or, neutral zone, left lane, whatever. And so there was a couple of other things that we would add on. So we called the Royal Road would be a kind of a piece to that. A pass back to the point would be another piece to that. From behind the end line would be a piece to that, and stretch passes. And so like these all, we had sort of like these like codes for them, I guess. And so somehow like Ryan, he must have known. I don't think he actually really knew before kind of coming across this coaching conference, but he had the data available. And so he kind of broke down all this data that we were working with, and he compared shots where the previous pass was headed back to the point for a defenseman, and the defenseman shot the puck. And he also included tips in there and found that about on all shot attempts, about 1.5% of those passes back to the point where the shot was taken would go in, including tips and deflected shots. And then he compared it from if a pass came from behind the end line, and he found, if I remember correctly, the shooting percentage was like 9% on all shot attempts. So quite high, well above average. And that changed the way I saw this decision. And then he had that piece about rebounds that we've also sort of discussed here. And so that changed the way that I saw the way the game is played in the offensive zone, right? Where I definitely preferred more of a cycle system. And then I think eventually it kind of came out to me where through other things where I kind of like more of a Tampa Bay system, where they kind of play like what I would call like a mid boards, and they create space in the middle of the ice and like the high slot sort of area. But regardless, I thought that piece was really well done. It connects with a lot of people, and it had a large influence on me.
Excellent. So one last piece on Hockey Graphs before we go to evolving hockey here. Curious about that piece that you wanted to revise. How would you want to revise it? Is there a specific thing, or you just want to update everything?
So the article that sort of influenced me on that was done in baseball, and I believe it was a Markov chain analysis. And at that time, I didn't have the know-abouts to run any sort of Markov chain analyses. I did like the analysis in Excel. I didn't know how to code at the time. So I would probably like to use like a more sophisticated method. I think generally speaking, the assumptions would be roughly the same, and the results would be roughly the same, but I would like to do it just in that more sophisticated method and maybe present on that. It's just maybe a better, it would give it a better reputation, I think.
Oh, and here's Mika coming to yell at you about don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah. Well, unless you had the means to do it. So I think now I probably have the means. I can get myself around R. And as you pointed out, I have like my cheat sheets over here in the background. So they should be able to get me through.
Excellent. And then did you go to the Hamilton Bulldogs from hockey grass, or did you do it after the fact? When did Hamilton come in?
So I started with Saginaw, and that was somebody approached Ryan. And I was doing the passing project, and somebody approached Ryan and said we're trying to start like an analytics department, and Ryan had recommended me. So I got it through the passing project. And then eventually that led me to hockey graphs.
Okay. So with Saginaw, when they're just starting brand new with that department, what were the things you guys were working on? Was it a one-man band, or did you have some help?
So we had a handful of people. I say a handful. I want to say it was 4, if I remember correctly, that we started off with. And yeah, a lot of it was just trying to start to develop a database, and just it started completely from scratch. So you want to be able to start looking at shot metrics and look at zone entries and exits and figure out, because it was year 1, right? And it was still like a little bit more new at the time. This is back the 16-17 season, I think, if I have my timeline correct. And so yeah, I mean, it was just starting and just trying to figure out how they can make it work. So Saginaw was a little bit less sophisticated, I guess, than when we got to Hamilton. And I moved over with one of the scouts essentially to Hamilton. They sort of had like a flip flop in the offices, and I ended up moving to Hamilton. I did not moving physically, but I went over to that team to help out, and I did that for the next 3 years. And eventually we started to get a little bit more sophisticated, and we started building a database of teams around the league, and we started to explore different things that we could track internally. And I wouldn't say it deviates too much though from like what you would have an idea of in the public sphere. It was just a large part of it's just putting together the database itself.
So were you having conversations with coaches about, hey, this player's doing good, this player's doing bad? Like, how did you guys plug into the organization itself?
So we had basically like someone above me would kind of step in the middle of it. So I never like physically would talk to the coaches about it, but we would have conversations kind of about like what's happening on the ice. And because we'd have to manually track it, right? So I'd watch all the games, and I'd notice different things sometimes too when you're going through and you're tracking and you're stopping and starting video and whatever, you might notice different things. And so it might be said, they might ask me for my opinions on different things. And, I kind of give it back and I say, this is sort of what I'm seeing. And like, I remember specifically like with Hamilton, eventually after the cup, it kind of went downhill, right? Because that's kind of just, unless you're a major program in the OHL, you usually kind of just make a run and then you struggle for a couple of years. And that's kind of what happened with Hamilton. They started making a run, and it was like, okay, we're really making a run here. And we went out at the trade deadline, and like we traded away Connor McMichael for Robert Thomas. And both of those are NHLers now, right? But Connor McMichael was going to have his draft year the following year. And but so we made some sacrifices to go ahead and win a championship the first year. And we started relying a lot on point shots as an example, and it wasn't really showing up in our data. And I kind of mentioned it, like, we're really relying on point shots here. And it was kind of a conversation that we had sort of all had. So I had that with another person who would then have that with a coaching staff. And then we sort of had plugged in some different ways in which we could start sort of looking at the quality of shots, because that wasn't something that we were really looking at before. and sort of some ideas of how we evaluate the decisions that we're making in the offensive zone. So there was conversations that were had, and then we also adjusted some of the ways that we track things.
Again, specifics. I got to know what were some ways that you changed into, or what were some different decisions you saw?
Some of it I don't actually really remember. I think, well, I would go with a different one. I would go with a different change that wasn't necessarily around any specific problem point, but at a certain point we started talking about, and we were having conversations about the game, and we started talking about our entries and being more effective on our entries, and knowing how to measure that. And this is shortly after Ryan had a piece had a piece out on passing after an entry and how that can kind of signal some quality. And so we tracked whether or not we were being able to complete passes off of entries, and that was also something that we wanted to start. The coaching staff liked the idea of, okay, adding that quality to our entries and not just having players just end up with like really low quality shots on the outside if they couldn't do anything or whatever. So they kind of wanted to kick that philosophy off as well. And sort of it was, you have two sides of it, I guess. I care more about being able to measure things, and then the coaches are like more about trying to be able to include that information and or take that information and like have philosophies on the ice. And so we have different ideas, but they all kind of connect. And one of us might have an idea first, and the other ones, you know, sometimes I think the coaches were big on the shot quality thing. And initially we weren't in Saginaw, we weren't recording scoring chances. And so initially in Hamilton, that was like one of the pieces that John Gruden wanted us to track scoring chances. So that was like a thing that we added in.
Isn't tracking scoring chances really not that great? Shouldn't we be talking about expected goals and things like that?
But you don't have so we had this on, we talked about this on our stat primer on the Evolving Hockey podcast. And I think scoring chances are fine when you don't have the ability to create a sophisticated model, because like obviously they are not all shots are the same, and we want to stay away from our point shots, right? So it's a way to measure like your perimeter shots versus your interior shots. It's kind of, you need to like tread lightly sometimes to scoring chances. And of course, then my rebuttal was we need to have multiple levels of these of scoring chances if we're going to use scoring chances, because that at least gets us even closer to an expected goals. But yeah, like it's sometimes all right as long as you know how to use them, is my sort of take on scoring chances. But if you have the ability to use an expected goals model, there's generally speaking no reason to use a scoring chance.
So I'm an unsophisticated data scientist, unlike yourself. So tell me where I'm going wrong with this. I feel like a novice could basically plot an offensive zone in Excel, place a value on those cells, place a number in it, and then on another side show the value of that. And then you can layer on, was it a one-timer? Where did the pass come from? And have a very simple expected goals model that would suffice without having to go too deep in the weeds.
You'd probably be correct. We just didn't, the way that we were trying to do this, we were trying to get in so it was kind of like do you take the speed of data acquisition, or do you take the quality? And so we wanted to get data in sort of as quickly as possible. And so you would sort of just run things like one row at a time. We didn't have a plot to use. Particularly in my time, we didn't. I don't know what they've done since, but we didn't have like a plot to use. So we just had no location for anything. So it was, yeah, with no location, then you sort of have the issue of you're just trying to figure out what's the easiest way to sort of draw something with quality. And I do think that scoring chances was okay as long as you knew how to use it.
Yeah, Patrick Bacon was telling me that that was not a good idea. So I was wondering if another gentleman could tell me it was a good idea, if I'm onto something.
The novice thing with the location idea,
Yeah.
like your idea. I mean, I think it's, again,
I mean, he's heavy into
it's
coding and all
all
that.
about, I guess sort of what you're trying to draw from it, or how much you're trying to draw, what your uncertainty is. If you're willing to live sort of in an uncertain world, then at least you're increasing your bins a little bit, which is good. Like the problem always with scoring chances is that you're determining that a shot's either 1 or 0, and with expected goals it's between 0 and 1. You're always living within that, and that when you are just outside the bound, right, you're saying that that is the same as something that's way away from the bound. Like a shot that's a foot outside of your home play area, if you're using that for scoring chance, is going to be marked that same 0 that a point shot is, or that a shot like from the neutral zone is. So like at least you're trying to like break that down a bit. So again, it's not as sophisticated. If you have an expected goals model, that's better. But if you have nothing else to deal with, I think like something sometimes is better than nothing. But back to like Micah's point, sometimes if you don't have the tools to kind of go all the way with the analysis, sometimes it's kind of better to just leave it raw. So I don't know.
Fair enough. We'll stick to Corsi. So getting into your time with Evolving Hockey, how did your role evolve after winning a championship?
So with Evolving Hockey, it sort of started out. So as I mentioned, I kind of brought the Twins into the hockey graphs. Then they really sort of ran into it. At the time, nobody knew that they're twins. Everybody thought they're one person. And then like a year later, we find out that they're twins because they're getting too big. And I don't know, this was like in 2019, we briefly talked about me kind of doing a lot of like more of the social media stuff, or just having that different point of view for them to help grow the site. And yeah, we kind of came together on it. We met at RITSAC, Rochester Institute of Technology Sports Analytics Conference in 2019, and sort of talked about what that would look like. And we wanted to kind of bring, I guess, stats to everybody, and just kind of make it more popular and communicate like kind of what's going on to like your average person or to anybody. It should be able to kind of fit your most novice person, which is difficult to do, to like your expert, and be able to kind of make these things consumable. So it's definitely a different goals that you have there, in different sort of like I don't know what you say, like it's kind of like a different environment, right? You're not trying to win anything, you're trying to like kind of make an entertainment product. I would say like that's kind of where we're at right now. We're trying to like make an entertainment product. And yeah, I mean, we've grown. We talked about like the Twitter has grown from like 4,000 followers to like 22,000 followers. And a lot of the contract stuff specifically has been a big part. And I've had my influence on that, as well as somebody who has a background in finance. And hopefully that will also kind of like tee into our model improvements as well. But I think the modeling stuff has been, or the contract model stuff has been big, and different players and agents have began to follow, but even like game by game stuff as well. We just sort of been trying to make these things more popular, and I think it's been a successful journey so far in these first couple of years.
Yeah, and you've done some work on your own a little bit as well. And one of your fascinating pieces, and I'm curious to maybe get your thoughts on it a little bit further, is how you were talking about NHL teams taking note of a women's college team, Boston College,
Yes.
on the power play specifically. So I'd love you to dive into that.
So that one was the fall of last year. And I thought it was interesting. so I mean, this is off on my own like personal blog, and I found it interesting. I went to sleep one night, and before I went to sleep, I tweeted out that eventually NHL power plays won't have bumpers anymore, and because everybody's kind of stuck in this 1-3-1 world, and I understand it, but I don't like it, and I think we could eventually grow. We've just been here for a few years, and it's time to grow.
But once
And
the box goes away, I agree with you.
it will see, well, yeah, we'll see. And a former NHLer had asked me to explain that. He found that very intriguing. And we sort of had a conversation about that and why. And that night I watched BC women's hockey play, and Hannah Bilka, who is an extremely talented player, is sort of their general, if you will, of their power play. And I'm watching it, and she's moving so fluidly, and there's like almost different like levels. It was just completely different than what you're seeing in the NHL, where it's sort of staggered, and she's moving in and out of different positions, and the way her teammates are moving around her, it was just I guess you would say, like, it was super fluid and open, and she was able to get off shots from different areas, and I found it extremely impressive. And that specific NHL player had told me, and I don't know if this was before or after I wrote that, but we had talked about film and how NHL players, they never go over even really any other leagues. And I said, like women's hockey would be a good area to look at, because the game is a different pace, and it's so different that you can kind of understand some core concepts, and the games are so different too, that they are drawing ideas from different areas, and they're sort of developing their own mindsets, which is also sort of what you're getting in Europe, but not exactly, because these things are relating. Whereas you go to women's hockey, it's even more separate. And yeah, it's just sort of drawing onto that. And so I think at times you do sort of see that as well in the NHL. I think when the Islanders power play is going well, like you see Matt Barzal kind of doing something like that. But yeah, it's just all about like creating more space on the power play and just using players as effectively as possible. And I just, generally speaking, think that teams could just do a lot more of drawing inspiration from other leagues, whether that is men's or women's hockey, and probably even other sports. I think there's a lot that relates to basketball. I think basketball is the most similar sport to hockey that you could draw things on more so than soccer. But yeah, like drawing things even from other sports and just trying to understand what's kind of happening at its core and sort of adjusting from there.
And you write a lot about the Leafs, which I find fascinating since you're a Bruins fan. You've got a big Bruins symbol behind you. So where did that come from?
One of my best friends is a Leafs fan, and actually I have a lot of friends that are Leafs fans, so I shouldn't say that. And then I have a friend that works for the Leafs as well, and they're just a super popular team. I've just found it fun to watch. I think Austin Matthews is he's just a lot of fun to watch, because not only is he a dynamic offensive player, but he's rounded out his game defensively as well. I know you've written about that. And in the way he plays, the way he conserves energy, etc., is super fun to watch. And I've liked William Nylander, and I just like a lot of the players on that team. I like the Bruins as well, especially their first line, especially, right, and Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk on the back end. And I'm lucky enough to go watch them in person regularly, but I'm not as lucky to be able to go watch the Leafs. But yeah, that's kind of stems on it, just friendships.
Well, when you officially cut the cord per se, and you get blacked out of all the local games, so I can't be a Jackets fan because I don't get any of the games. So Leafs are the next best option for me. So East Coast time zone. So I'm in on this Leafs. So I want to talk a little bit further on this. And you had a great piece, in my opinion, about how we should not tear the Leafs down after they lost to Montreal in the playoffs again in the first round.
Okay. I have to remember which one. I feel like I've written on it multiple times, but yeah, like I understand like it wears on everybody that like, but playoffs are playoffs. There's just a lot of luck that was built into that. And I think it was like just, to me, I try to look at it as much as possible. I try to look at things from like a very neutral standpoint and just like enjoy things. And I remember like watching those games, and while I'm cheering for the Leafs, I just remember almost like smiling and just having a lot of fun that Carey Price was just like on his game, specifically in those overtime games. I mean, they were losing those games. They lost those games in tight games, right? And although they kind of had to come back for them, and they won a couple in dominant fashion, but it was like sometimes you just have to like appreciate that. At the end of the day, like Carey Price was just, he was back to being prime Carey Price, and it was like a lot of fun to watch. And I think there's just a lot of pressure also that comes from it, with the fact that they are top heavy in terms of salary and their team. And I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about the way that they structure the roster. And they choose like a different route than say Tampa Bay, who's also kind of gotten lucky to be able to kind of sign guys to really good deals, or like a Boston who just flat out got lucky with their biggest stars taking deals. So yeah, I don't think it's as big of a deal. You look at them now, they're tied for first in the league in terms of points, although they haven't played, or they played a lot of games so far, I believe. Like, I don't think they have it in points percentage, but I think they're tied in points, and they're super hot lately. They are just dominating games. Like, I think the record doesn't even show how good that they've been, and they've had like Rasmus Sandin and even Lugren kind of come in and just sort of just be solid defensemen for them. So yeah, I don't think it, I think this is the year that they get over the hump, but I could be mistaken. And that's why you don't tear it down.
What we need is evolution, not revolution.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's kind of it, right? That's a good way to put it with the evolving hockey, right? I mean, yeah, it's just sort of changing the different pieces and keeping the same core and going at it, which is also something that like some of the other successful teams have done, right? Like you look at the Bruins, they have their core. Granted, they've kind of gotten lucky with the contracts here with Bergeron and Marchand and Pastrnak and McAvoy, and the other pieces kind of just sort of rotate in and out, and you just don't know what the world is going to have set for you, right? Because they kind of fell into Taylor Hall at of extremely cheap price. They didn't go out and get him in free agency, and then they traded for a second round pick and a third liner for him, and they signed him to a value deal because he had a few bad years and everybody was down on him. Whereas the Leafs, they don't necessarily have that luxury.
Yeah, I think he was fed up with sucking and constantly losing, that he was like, all right, I will take a deal to be in a fun work environment.
Well, he took that like 1 year risk on himself with COVID, and it just didn't work out. I think he really likes it in Boston, where he's not the centerpiece as well. He gets to play second line, and it's good enough for him. And yeah, I sort of agree with you there. And it's just also a good environment. It's just it's a better work environment. Not even necessarily fun playing. I think just the Bruins leadership is nice for him. I think he really appreciates that, and it sort of allows him to grow into a leader in his veteran years. So we'll see. I think he's quite happy with this decision. But yeah, I mean, back to the Leafs, I think you have the same pieces, and then you have these like little exterior parts that kind of go in and out. And you look at some of the signings that they made this summer, and how they've worked out with Kampf and Kasha. And like, I think you look at that and you say, well, like, now those are key parts of the team. Bunting, these are key parts to the team now, because they're super cheap and they're playing well. And, yeah, it's just sort of evolutionizing.
Awesome. That is what I have for this evening. Anything else or anything you want to plug? Floor is all yours. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up. And I want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything necessarily to plug. I guess follow the Evolving Hockey account if you don't, and listen to our podcast as well, I guess. But no, I don't think I have anything specific to say. It was just it was fun to talk to you for the last sort of hour here, and well, going in and out of recording when my internet went down, but yeah, I had a blast talking, and hopefully we could do it again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll turn it around. You can interview me. Really go crazy. We'll evolve through that too.
Yes, exactly. Keep going with the puns.
Yeah, love absolutely. It. All right. Well, thanks, Shawn. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I did. So before we let you go, though, we'd like to remind you to please like our podcast, subscribe to it, give us a follow, and share this with all the hockey people in your life. We really appreciate growing this community, this podcast. Remember, we also have a newsletter, the Hockey IQ newsletter as well. Really excited to continue to grow this. So please help us grow this further by liking, subscribing, following, and sharing with everyone. So appreciate you all. Take care.